Here's a number that should scare you more than it does. If you owe $5,000 on a credit card at 24% interest and you only ever pay the minimum, you will still be making payments in the year 2043. Not a typo. 17 years on $5,000. And by the time you're done, you'll have handed the bank roughly $7,800 in interest alone, more money in interest than you ever actually borrowed. Let that sit for a second, because most people assume the minimum payment is a responsible, modest way to stay current. It's not modest, it's a machine-engineered almost mathematically perfectly to keep you paying for as long as legally possible while giving you the smallest illusion of progress. And today we're going to prove that with actual arithmetic, not vibes. Let's start with what the minimum payment even is, because most people have never actually looked at the formula. On most modern cards, the minimum is calculated as whichever is larger, about 1% of your balance plus that month's interest, or a flat floor amount, usually somewhere between $25 and $35. That sounds harmless. It's the plus interest part that quietly changes everything. Let's run the numbers on our $5,000 balance at 24% APR, which works out to a monthly interest rate of 2%. Month 1. Your interest charge alone is $100. Your minimum payment, using the 1% plus interest formula, is $150, $100 of pure interest, and only $50 actually chipping away at what you owe. So of your $150 payment, 2/3 of it evaporates before it even touches your debt. Your new balance isn't $4,850, it's $4,950. Now here's where it gets strange, and this is the part almost nobody notices, because the minimum payment is a percentage of your balance. As your balance shrinks, your required payment shrinks too. That sounds like a nice feature. It is actually the trap. Your payment is always chasing your balance downward at almost the exact same rate the balance is shrinking on its own. It's like trying to walk to a door that keeps sliding away from you at nearly the same speed you're walking. Mathematically, your balance is decaying by roughly 1% a month. A balance that shrinks by a fixed percentage rather than a fixed dollar amount takes an enormously long time to approach zero, because the closer you get to zero, the smaller each step becomes. Run that decay forward, and your $5,000 balance doesn't cross below the $1,167 threshold, the point where the flat dollar floor payment finally kicks in instead of the percentage, until you're nearly 12 years into this. 12 years just to get down to about a fifth of what you originally owed. And from there, at a flat $35 a month against a 2% monthly interest rate, it takes almost 5 more years to finish the job. Add it up, roughly 200 months. 16, 17 years on a balance most people think of as not that bad. Now the interest total. I want to be precise about how we get there, because this is the number that actually matters. Over those 200 plus months, you're sending the bank a payment every single month, some of it interest, a sliver of it principal. When you tally every dollar you ever hand over and subtract the original $5,000 you borrowed, what's left is pure profit for the lender, and it lands somewhere around $7,800. You paid for your $5,000 purchase almost 3 times over in total dollars out the door, and the bank collected more in interest than the entire original debt. That's not a rounding error. That's the entire business model. So here's the reframe, and I'm only going to say this plainly once. The minimum payment isn't a payment plan. It's a subscription. You're not paying off debt, you're renting it indefinitely, and the rent is interest. Now let's do the comparison that actually matters, because knowing the problem is only half the video. What happens if, instead of the drifting, ever-shrinking minimum, you just pick a fixed number and stick to it? Say, $150 a month, every month, no matter what the statement says the minimum is. Same $5,000 balance, same 24% APR. Using standard amortization math, that fixed $150 pays the whole thing off in about 55 months, under 5 years. Total interest paid over those 5 years, around $3,325. Compare that to the minimum payment path, 17 years and $7,800 in interest, same debt. Same interest rate, same starting balance. The only variable that changed is whether your payment amount stayed fixed or was allowed to shrink alongside the balance. That single difference is worth over $4,000 and more than a decade of your life. That's the whole video, honestly, in one comparison. But let's keep going, because there are a few more angles that make this even more interesting. Here's an angle most people miss entirely. Paying double the minimum doesn't cut your payoff time in half. It cuts it by way more than half. This trips people up because we intuitively think in straight lines. Double the payment, half the time. Debt doesn't work that way because interest compounds against whatever principal remains, and small differences in monthly payment change how fast that principal actually falls, which changes how much interest accrues next month, which changes the payment after that. It snowballs, just in the direction you want this time. Take our $5,000 balance again. At $150 a month, you're done in about 4.5 years. Bump that to $300 a month, literally doubling it, and you're not looking at roughly 2 years and 3 months, you're looking at closer to 19 months. The math bends in your favor faster than intuition expects, because every extra dollar you throw at principal early is a dollar that stops generating interest for the rest of the loan's life. Front-loaded extra payments are worth dramatically more than the same extra dollars paid later, which is precisely why minimum payments, which are smallest right when your balance, and therefore the interest generated, is largest, are the worst possible sequencing of payments mathematically available to you. Now, why does the minimum payment exist at all if it's this lopsided? It's worth understanding the history, because it's not some ancient trick, it's a fairly recent evolution. Decades ago, minimum payments on cards were commonly around 5% of the balance. Under that structure, cards actually got paid off in a handful of years even on autopilot. Over time, as competition pushed issuers to make cards feel more affordable month to month, minimums drifted down to 3%, then 2%, and for many issuers today, effectively closer to 1% plus interest. Lower minimums make monthly statements look friendlier. They also mathematically multiply the total interest collected over the life of the balance, sometimes by several times over. Nobody needed to conspire for this to happen. Issuers were simply optimizing for what payment keeps this customer current and comfortable, and it turns out the payment that does that also happens to be the payment that maximizes total interest collected over time. Those two incentives point in exactly the same direction, which is worth sitting with for a second. Here's something else worth knowing, because it actually shows the system correcting itself, at least partially. After 2009, US regulators required credit card statements to include a box. You've probably seen it and skipped right past it, that tells you, in plain numbers, how long it will take to pay off your balance at the minimum payment, and how much total interest you'll pay if you do. That box exists specifically because lawmakers realized most cardholders had no intuition for the math we just walked through. The problem is, printing the number doesn't automatically change behavior. There's actually behavioral research on this exact question. Studies looking at how the mere presence of a minimum payment figure on a bill affects what people choose to pay. The consistent finding, seeing a minimum payment number, even a tiny one, tends to anchor people toward paying less than they otherwise would have, even when they can clearly afford more. Just seeing $35 minimum due printed on the page pulls some people's actual payment down toward that number, purely because it's sitting there as a suggestion. The math hasn't changed, your brain's anchor point has. Let's talk about who this genuinely does not apply to, because I don't want to make this sound like every credit card user is trapped in a 17-year spiral. That's just not true for most people, and it's worth being honest about that. If you pay your statement balance in full every month, none of this interest math ever activates. You're using the card as a payment tool, not a loan. And the minimum payment line is irrelevant to you. It might as well not exist. If you're in a 0% introductory APR period, the same balance behaves completely differently because there's no interest compounding against you yet, though the math above is exactly what kicks in the moment that promotional rate expires, so it's worth having a plan before that date arrives, not after. And if you occasionally pay only the minimum during one genuinely tight month, a car repair, a medical bill, and then go right back to paying well above it, you're not the person this video is warning about. 1 month of minimum payment barely moves the needle. It's the person who pays minimum as a permanent default strategy, month after month for years, who runs into the full weight of this math. So what actually works, arithmetically? A few things, and none of them require a finance degree. First, treat the minimum payment number as information, not instruction. It tells you the least you're legally allowed to pay, not a target. Second, if you can only do one thing, pick a fixed dollar amount you can sustain and pay that same number every month regardless of what the statement says the minimum has dropped to. As we showed, that single habit turns a 17-year payoff into a 5-year payoff on an identical balance. Third, if you have multiple cards, the math says put any extra money toward whichever one has the highest interest rate first, because that's the balance generating the most damage per month. That's usually called the avalanche method, and it is, dollar for dollar, the mathematically optimal order, even though paying off your smallest balance first can feel more motivating for some people. Both work, one just costs less. One more piece of arithmetic worth knowing, because it changes how you think about small debts. Interest doesn't care how you feel about the balance. A $5,000 balance at 24% behaves identically whether that $5,000 came from a vacation, a medical bill, or a slow accumulation of $40 purchases over 2 years. The bank's math is indifferent to the story behind the number, which actually cuts in your favor once you internalize it. You don't need to feel guilty or overwhelmed to fix this. You just need to change one input: the size and consistency of your monthly payment. That's it. That's the entire lever. To bring it all the way back to where we started, the minimum payment on a $5,000 balance can turn into 17 years and $7,800 in interest, or with the exact same balance and the exact same rate, about 5 years and roughly $325 in interest, just by refusing to let your payment shrink along with your balance. Same debt, same bank, same interest rate. The only difference is whether you let the payment amount drift downward with you, or you hold it steady while the balance falls out from under it. That gap, years of your life, and thousands of dollars, comes from one decision you can make today, on your very next statement. If this kind of breakdown is useful to you, subscribe, because we run these numbers on real financial decisions every week. Student loans, car leases, buy now, pay later, all of it. And it genuinely changes how you spend and save once you can see the math for yourself. Hit like if this one made you want to go check your own statement, and I'll see you in the next one.